The Mystery of the Missing Stone, a scientific look at the tomb of Jesus. Let's deep dive.
As Easter comes around for Christians, it's all about that powerful story of Jesus's crucifixion, his death, and then the incredible resurrection.
Absolutely. Central to the faith.
But if you really zero in on that resurrection part, there's this immediate puzzle, isn't there? That sealed tomb with this massive stone blocking the way.
Yeah. And the big question right away is, how on earth did that stone get moved?
Exactly.
It's a question that's, it's echoed through centuries. It captures the curiosity of believers and, skeptics too. Though for this deep dive, we've gathered some really fascinating material that tries to tackle this head on.
Right.
Our aim is to explore the different ideas around the empty tomb, maybe consider possibilities beyond just the strictly religious explanation.
And look at some of those naturalistic theories people have suggested, using historical accounts, scientific perspectives, that kind of stuff.
Precisely. Because while for many, the answer is simply miraculous, which is, core to the belief, there's also been a lot of intriguing thought given to other ways that stone might have moved.
We're talking everything from divine intervention, obviously, to more sort of down-to-earth explanations, like maybe an earthquake.
Or other possibilities people have floated.
Okay, so let's get into it. One of the first ideas that often pops up if you're thinking non-miraculously is the swoon theory. What's the basic idea there?
Well, the swoon theory, it essentially suggests that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross.
Okay.
Instead, the idea is he just lost consciousness, fainted from the extreme physical pain, the trauma, the blood loss.
So he seemed dead, but wasn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, the theory goes, he was taken down, placed in the cool tomb, and somehow revived later on.
And then just walked out.
Well, escaped, leading his followers to mistakenly believe they'd seen a resurrection.
Right. Okay. I can see why that might, at first glance, seem like a plausible, sort of natural explanation for an empty tomb. No miracle needed, just a mistake.
It has that initial appeal, yeah. A simple answer.
But when you actually dig into the evidence, it seems like this theory runs into some pretty significant problems, doesn't it?
That's a really crucial point. While it offers that seemingly straightforward answer, the swoon theory faces, major challenges when you look at the medical and historical details we actually have.
Like what specifically?
For starters, the way crucifixion worked. The typical causes of death involved things like asphyxiation, not being able to breathe properly, cardiac arrest, severe blood loss, shock. The whole process was brutal and, frankly, designed to be fatal.
And the Romans doing the execution, they weren't amateurs, were they? They knew how to ensure someone was dead.
Absolutely. They were professionals at this. And the biblical accounts themselves, they actually state that Roman soldiers confirmed Jesus' death.
How did they do that?
By piercing his side with a spear. And what's particularly interesting, medically speaking, is the detail about a mix of blood and water flowing out.
I've heard about that. What's the significance?
Well, from a modern medical perspective, that's often interpreted as evidence of something called pleural effusion, basically fluid built up between the lungs and the chest wall.
Okay.
Which is consistent with death resulting from severe traumatic injuries and potentially heart failure, not just fainting.
So, far from just a surface wound, this sounds like pretty strong biological evidence against him just being unconscious.
It certainly points that way. And we have perspectives from medical professionals who have looked at this.
Like Dr. McGovern.
Exactly. Dr. Thomas McGovern, a surgeon, is quoted in our material. He suggests the likely cause of death involved a combination of factors. Heart rhythm problems, serious blood loss, the overall shock and trauma.
Things the swoon theory just doesn't really account for.
It really doesn't hold up well against that kind of physiological reality of crucifixion.
And there's another angle too, isn't there? Even if, just hypothetically, he had survived the cross, what state would he have been in?
Right. Professor Mikhail Licona brings this up. He argues that even in the incredibly unlikely scenario where Jesus somehow survived, the sheer physical devastation, the emotional trauma, he would have been left incredibly weak, probably crippled, and in desperate need of serious medical care.
Not exactly capable of rolling away a giant stone and appearing victorious?
Precisely. It's highly unlikely someone in that condition could then emerge, overpower guards perhaps, move the stone, and then inspire followers to believe he'd conquered death in glory. He'd likely be collapsed, not leading a movement.
Makes sense. Now, I've occasionally heard something about the dive reflex. Could that have maybe played a role in survival? Slowed his heart rate way down?
Yeah, that does get mentioned sometimes.
Yeah.
But the dive reflex is a real thing. It can slow the heart and conserve oxygen when someone's, say, drowning or suffocating. But the scale of the injuries Jesus sustained, the flogging, the crucifixion itself, the blood loss, the spear wound, it just vastly outweighs any minor benefit a dive reflex might offer in that specific context.
So it wouldn't have been nearly enough.
Almost certainly not. It just doesn't seem medically plausible for survival, given everything else.
Okay. So it feels like the swoon theory, while maybe an early attempt at a natural explanation, really struggles against the medical and historical evidence we have.
That seems to be the broad consensus among experts who studied it, yeah.
All right, let's pivot then. What about another naturalistic explanation that comes up in the sources? The earthquake theory. This one feels a bit more grounded, maybe, pun intended.
Yeah, maybe. It does feel a bit different. The earthquake theory actually draws its basis directly from one of the Gospels.
On which one?
The Gospel of Matthew. It specifically mentions earthquakes happening both around the time of Jesus' death.
Right, when the curtain in the temple tore.
Exactly. And then, again, when the tomb was found empty on Easter morning.
Okay, so 2 earthquakes mentioned.
Correct. And the idea here is that seismic activity, an earthquake, could have been the actual force that moved that huge stone sealing the tomb.
And we have Professor Lawrence Mikitik's analysis on this, too. What does he suggest about these 2 quakes?
Professor Mikitik, he clarifies that the first earthquake, the one at the moment of death, probably wouldn't have affected the tomb directly based on the description.
Okay.
However, he proposes that a second, potentially quite violent earthquake happening on Easter morning.
The one mentioned when the women arrived.
Yes. That one could have been powerful enough to, say, crack the tomb's entrance or dislodge the stone, allowing it to be rolled away perhaps more easily, or maybe even rolling it away itself.
That's a pretty specific scenario, but is there any, actual geological evidence for a big earthquake in that region around then, independent of the gospel account?
Well, this is where it gets particularly compelling. The research material points to findings from the German Research Center for Geophysics.
And what did they find?
They actually discovered evidence of a significant earthquake, a major seismic event that occurred in that area sometime between 26 AD and 36 AD.
Wow, okay. And that time frame lines up pretty well with when Jesus' crucifixion is generally dated, doesn't it?
It aligns very closely, yes. So, while it doesn't definitively prove the earthquake moved this stone,
of course,
it does provide some solid scientific backing for the possibility of significant seismic activity happening right around that time, in that very place. It adds a layer of scientific plausibility to that theory.
That's genuinely fascinating, seeing historical text potentially intersect with geological data like that. Okay, one more theory mentioned in our sources. This one involves human action. The idea that the disciples stole the body.
Yes, this theory is, interestingly, also recorded right there in the Gospel of Matthew.
As an explanation given at the time.
Exactly. It's presented as the explanation the religious leaders told the guards to spread, that Jesus' followers came during the night while the guards slept and stole the body to fake a resurrection.
But the information we have suggests some pretty big problems with that idea too, right? It wasn't like the disciples were feeling particularly brave or organized just then.
Precisely. The Gospels consistently depict the disciples as, terrified, confused, hiding, scattered after the crucifixion.
Yeah, Peter denying Jesus 3 times.
Exactly. They were hardly in a psychological state to suddenly cook up and execute a daring, high-risk plan to steal a body.
Especially since there were guards, armed Roman soldiers, weren't there?
Yes, Matthew's account explicitly mentions a guard being placed specifically to prevent the body from being stolen. So the disciples would have had to somehow overpower or sneak past trained, armed soldiers.
Seems unlikely given their described fear.
Extremely unlikely, and Professor Mikitik weighs in on this one too.
What's his take?
He emphasizes that exact point. The disciples were in no condition physically or emotionally to confront Roman soldiers. They lacked the means, probably lacked the courage, and maybe even the initial motive, especially since rumors of the empty tomb were apparently already starting to spread.
So the idea of them pulling off this complex, dangerous theft seems pretty improbable based on the context.
It does face significant challenges, yes.
Yeah.
It's difficult to really picture them successfully carrying that out.
Okay, so if we step back now and look at these main naturalistic explanations we've covered, the swoon theory, the earthquake, the disciples stealing the body, what's the kind of overall picture emerging from our source material?
Well, the overall picture seems to be that while people have certainly tried to find natural explanations for the empty tomb, each of these theories runs into some fairly serious roadblocks based on the evidence we have.
The swoon theory seems medically very unlikely.
Yes, largely dismissed by medical experts due to what we know about crucifixion. It just doesn't align.
And the disciples stealing the body, that seems highly improbable given their state and the presence of guards.
Agreed. The historical context makes that one difficult to support.
Which leaves the earthquake theory.
Which, interestingly, stands out as having at least some degree of scientific plausibility behind it, thanks to that geological evidence of seismic activity around the right time.
But still not definitive proof it moved the stone, just that it could have been a factor.
Exactly. Plausible, but not proven.
So it seems like none of the naturalistic theories offer a completely clean, universally accepted explanation.
That seems fair to say, based on the sources, yes. Each has its difficulties.
But, regardless of how someone chooses to interpret the empty tomb, whether they see it through the lens of faith as a miracle, or whether they lean towards one of these natural explanations, however flawed, our sources do seem to underscore one really central point, don't they?
Absolutely. And that is that the empty tomb itself, however it happened, remains utterly foundational to Christian belief.
It's the linchpin.
It really is. It's the pivotal event underpinning the entire doctrine of Jesus' resurrection, and that event has profoundly shaped religious thought, history, and culture for 2 millennia.
Yeah.
Its significance is undeniable.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into this enduring mystery of the empty tomb, we've looked at quite a spectrum of explanations.
Yeah, from the medically questionable swoon theory,
Right, to the more geologically plausible earthquake idea.
and the challenges facing the theory about the disciples' involvement.
And it's clear, isn't it, that the question of how that stone was moved, what really happened that first Easter morning, it continues to be debated, discussed, contemplated.
Oh, definitely. Among scholars, theologians, historians, believers, skeptics. It remains a potent point of discussion and reflection.
Which sort of leads us to a final thought, maybe, for you, our listener. Consider how this all intersects. You have historical accounts, you have scientific findings potentially weighing in, and you have deeply held faith. How does exploring these different perspectives, the natural possibilities alongside the supernatural claims, how does that shape our understanding of these pivotal historical moments?
Yeah, what does looking at it from all these angles really reveal about maybe
What is your
the nature
thoughts
of belief
on this
itself
story?
and our
Comment.
continuous human search for
Thanks.
meaning and understanding in the face of profound mysteries?